Okay, I haven't done a video since, what was it, Monday or Tuesday? So I'm going to do a catch-up video here. Haven't done one of these for a while. Going to start off with Josh Kelly's victory last weekend over Troy Williamson. Now, it was apparent right from the first round to me that Josh Kelly was a lot more relaxed in this fight than he was against David Avanesian. Way, way more relaxed. You could see it in his movement. You could see it in the look on his face. He was just exuding relaxation and confidence. And of course, that's a very important thing in boxing. Now, part of that, I'm sure, is down to the things that him and Adam Booth were working on in the gym. They tried to create some continuity between the gym environment and the fighting environment, such as not having Josh Kelly sit down between rounds, because he doesn't sit down between rounds in the gym. So again, they were trying to just take what he does in the gym, the mindset, the attitude and all that, and bring it into the ring. And they successfully did it against Troy Williamson. And one of the things that they've been working on as well is clearly Josh Kelly's clinch game. Because against David Avanesian, he didn't start clinching until it was already too late. You know what I mean? He was trying to shut the door after the horse had bolted, when Avanesian had already started doing damage and built up a head of steam. That's when Josh Kelly tried to clinch, and his clinching wasn't very effective. But here against Troy Williamson, his clinching was much more effective, and he established it immediately. Like straight away in the first round, he was on the clinch. And I'm not someone who advocates excessive clinching. In fact, I can't stand excessive clinching, but I didn't think it was excessive from Josh Kelly. I think he did it within the rules, and he was able to nullify Troy Williamson early. He was very confident. Another thing as well that I suspect added to Josh Kelly's confidence is the fact that he knows Troy Williamson. Now, sometimes people have a fear of the unknown, but when you know someone, like for example, if you had to box your best friend, you're not going to be as nervous boxing your best friend in most instances as you would be boxing a stranger. Do you know what I mean? Not that Williamson is Josh Kelly's best friend, but they do know each other. The commentators said that they were friends outside the ring. They're obviously from the same region in the UK, the Northeast. So I think that also helped Kelly feel relaxed, that there was the familiarity in terms of the person he was stepping in with. And he stung Troy Williamson several times early. And I think that put Williamson in his box a little bit. I think he became a little too tentative. He was still coming forward and applying pressure, but it was nowhere near intense enough. Kelly had far too much time and space to get his shots off and just do what he wanted. They say that boxing is 80% mental. They throw these arbitrary figures out there. But what I can say is the mental aspect certainly plays a massive part, for sure. Because at the end of the fight, Josh Kelly looked like he could have done several more rounds. And a lot of that is just down to how relaxed he was mentally in there. So yeah, he boxed Troy Williamson's head off. Williamson was just far too slow, far too clunky, didn't have the fluid. The athleticism gap between the two was absolutely vast. I mean, it was just vast. And Kelly did what he wanted and really schooled the guy over the course of 12 rounds and picks up the British super welterweight, or light middleweight if you prefer, title. Now, moving forward, they're talking about Josh Kelly challenging for world honors. I'm not so convinced that he can have success at world level against the best guys. And I'm happy to be proven wrong, but based upon what I've seen, there's going to need to be more improvement still, particularly in the area of mindset with Josh Kelly. And yeah, he was a lot more relaxed here than he was against Avanesian, but the fact that he fell apart as dramatically as he did against Avanesian, I don't think that's something you can remedy very easily. I think that might take years, and it may take a process of him being in similar situations and managing to come through. Do you know what I mean? I mean, if you look at the Avanesian fight, he looked like he was in a state of shock. He got that cut, that weird cut on the back of the head. And it's like all the life just drained out of him. And that's an alarming thing to see because many other fighters in a similar situation, I'm talking about the fighters who make it, when they're in a crisis like that, they bite down on their gum shield and they come through it. But it's like Josh Kelly mentally checked out. I'm not saying he quit in the fight, but he just didn't have the spirit that you would want to see in a situation like that, you know? So I would need to see him come through some tough moments to really have any confidence that he's going to be able to make it at the next level. But he certainly improved, strategically and mindset to some extent. We saw that against Troy Williamson. I was speaking to Chris Andre in the Element group a couple of days ago about the fight. And he is concerned about the fact that Josh Kelly wastes a lot of energy. He makes these big dramatic movements, both offensive and defensive movements. And he thinks that that's going to catch up with Josh Kelly as he steps up because better fighters are going to be able to feint and get Kelly to make these big dramatic defensive or offensive movements. And that's going to drain him of his energy. So just using feints, they'll be able to drain Josh Kelly's energy and, making him make these movements, but also psychologically, And that's definitely a good point. He said that Kelly could have controlled rounds just with his jab, but rather doing that, he was still doing all this dramatic movement. I suspect that the reason why Kelly didn't rely on his jab so much to control slow rounds is maybe because he doesn't have the confidence that his jab is powerful enough to deter opponents from coming forward. Now, obviously, he is trained by Adam Booth. And Booth, certainly if you look at his work with David Haye, doesn't seem that keen on his fighters getting into jabbing contests. He seems to like his fighters to stay out of range and use raiding tactics. That's what David Haye was all about. Haye was never a jab-heavy guy. He was a guy that liked to stay outside and then jump in with the big shots. Obviously, David Haye was a tremendous puncher, so he had a lot of success with that style, where he's kind of quite low volume, doesn't throw that many jabs, but when he does throw, it tends to be power shots, right? Leads with power shots a lot. Obviously, the limitations of that showed up in certain fights, like against Vladimir Klitschko. With Josh Kelly, he doesn't have pound for pound that kind of punching power that David Haye has. So I'm sure some people believe that Kelly's not going to be able to get away with as much as David Haye was able to get away with. And maybe they're right about that. But what I will say is, he's certainly not the puncher David Haye was pound for pound. But I think his athleticism all round is a bit better than David Haye. Because David Haye, his left hooks were a bit wide. He could be a bit wild with his punches at times. Kelly, to me, seems a bit more well-balanced than David Haye. He doesn't throw himself off balance as often. And of course, that's part of David Haye's power-generating technique. He would put so much of his body weight into the shots, so much momentum into the shots, that he would be off balance. Not only if he missed a shot, but even when he landed a shot, he'd often put himself off balance afterwards. Kelly stays more balanced. He doesn't launch himself into punches so dramatically as David Haye did. So while he isn't getting the same amount of power on the shots, he's also putting himself in better position to come back if he misses, So it's a trade-off. But certainly, looking at Josh Kelly now and David Haye looked a better talent. And it isn't just because of David Haye's extra punching power, but David Haye did have the mindset, the mentality, Like even when he lost to Carl Thompson, he went down swinging. Yeah, he punched himself out early, and you can I'll probably make comparisons between David Haye against Carl Thompson and Josh Kelly against Avanesyan. There are similarities there. But David Haye went out trying to take Thompson's head off. Do you know what I mean? Whereas Josh Kelly went out with a bit of a whimper, When the fight was stopped, David Haye was all over the place, and he was actually upset that the fight got stopped. And obviously, subsequently, David Haye showed that he did have a lot of grip. So, just as I've said with Kelly before, in order to convince me that this guy can be successful at the top level, at 154. I need to see him come through some similar situations to the one he was in against Avanesian. Not necessarily getting cut, but just being in a tough fight where somebody really knows how to put it on him and coming through. David Haye did that. We saw him do that against Fragamini. We saw him do that, obviously, when he stepped up eventually against Jean-Marc Mormec. So he proved that he did have that grit and that ability to bite down on a gum shield and get it done in a crisis. Kelly hasn't shown that yet. So for me, the jury's still out on whether he can be successful at world level. But certainly at this level, against the Troy Williamsons of the world, he looks to have far too much. So, yeah, that's my assessment of that fight. Congratulations to Josh Kelly. He definitely showed improvement, but I think there's more improvement still that's necessary, at least to convince me that he could be successful at world level. So moving on to Tyson Fury's victory over Derek Chisora in their trilogy fight. I obviously did a video regarding Fury's comments about an injury and saying that he'd need 6 to 8 weeks to recover, but I didn't do a post-fight review, so I'm going to do the post-fight review here. Now, to me, it's quite clear at this stage that Fury's feet are slowing down. He can still get around the ring well, particularly for a guy of his size, but his foot speed is noticeably slower now, even than it was, let's say, a couple years ago against Otto Wallin. Now, obviously, in the Wallin fight, he was lighter, maybe 14 pounds lighter than he is now. But, nonetheless, I think it's a combination of being lighter back then, but also being a bit younger. There are these adages in boxing, such as the last thing to go is punching power. The last thing a fighter loses is his punch, right? But another adage, which I think is true most of the time, is the legs are the first thing to go. When you see a fighter deteriorating, they usually start to become slower on their feet first, and then everything else comes after that. They usually retain their hand speed for longer than their foot speed. And I'm seeing Fury's feet slowing down quite noticeably. If you watch the early, 2 rounds, the first 2 rounds against Otto Wallin, he's moving around much faster than he did against Chisora or against Dillian Whyte. And he's able to keep good distance. Against Chisora, who is slow as molasses on his feet at this stage, Chisora's feet have slowed up tremendously just over the past 2 years. I mean, you look at the early rounds against Usyk, Chisora came out like a bull in a china shop. There was nowhere near that level of pace for Chisora against Pulev, against Parker, or against Tyson Fury here. His feet have slowed down dramatically. So, but he was still able to close the distance on Fury quite easily. A guy this slow and plodding was able to close the distance, and he did land a few of those big right hands over the top. They were partially blocked by Fury, but, several of them did get through early in the fight. So if a guy who's as slow-footed as this can close the range that easily, I don't think Usyk's going to have any problem closing the range and landing his shots. So, yeah, that's one thing I think, one area where Fury, to me, is clearly deteriorating is the foot speed. But one area that Fury is improving is in his punch technique. I think Fury's punch technique is better now in terms of power punching than it's ever been before in his career. If you go back and look at his fight against Klitschko, he couldn't throw his right hand properly. Him and Hughie Fury used to throw these kind of awkward, bent arm looking right hands. He wasn't getting the proper snap and the proper straightness on the right hand distance. It was even the same in the, it was the same in the Wallin fight. It was the same also in the first and second Wilder fights. He was still throwing the right hand kind of awkwardly. But from the third Wilder fight, that I think he's shown improvement in technique in every fight that he's been with Sugar Hill. I think there was improvement in technique, or certainly a change in technique, between the Wallin fight and the second Wilder fight. But then I saw improvement in his punch technique between the second and third Wilder fights, even more improvement between the third Wilder fight and the Whyte fight, and even more improvement between that and this fight against Derek Chisora still. I've spoken in the past about how fighters have two different primes often. They'll have an athletic prime, which is normally in your 20s. Then they'll have a technical prime where their technique is at its absolute best. And that often isn't in the 20s. Sometimes fighters will, particularly with heavyweights, sometimes they won't get to their technical prime until they're well into their 30s. I think that was certainly the case with Lennox Lewis, for example. His athletic prime was maybe when he was 27, when he fought Razor Ruddock. That was Lewis at the most athletic he ever was. There was never a time subsequent to that fight where Lewis ever looked that fast and sharp and athletic and was able to move around that well. And obviously he put weight on as he got older. But technically, I think Lewis was at his best maybe around 34, 35. So there was quite a gap between the technical prime and the athletic prime. And obviously, ideally, you want the technical prime and the athletic prime to happen at the same time, because that's when you've really got a fighter that's just firing on all cylinders and what have you. But as I say, in many cases, you don't get that. You get the athletic prime comes first, and then you're a bit past your athletic prime, but then you reach your technical prime. Now, against certain fighters, being athletic, against certain opponents, being athletic is going to help you more than being technical. I suspect that will be the case with Tyson Fury against Alexander Usyk if that fight happens. Because I think Fury's going to need quick feet to close Usyk down, get on top of him, and just pummel him. The way he did to Steve Cunningham. I think that's the kind of fight he's going to need to fight. There's nothing I saw in this Derek Chisora fight that has changed my mind with regards to Usyk actually getting the better of it on the outside. If Chisora can get close this easily, and I know, it's Chisora, maybe he's not as on it, maybe he's not as sharp as he would be against Usyk. But the kind of weight that Fury comes in now, I just don't see Usyk having that much trouble getting close to him and landing his shots. And Usyk, of course, is a southpaw, so that immediately takes away Tyson Fury's left hand. Now, Fury can turn southpaw if he likes, but I don't think he's going to be as effective as a southpaw as Alexander Usyk. Usyk has fought loads of southpaws throughout his, certainly, amateur career. He had 315 amateur fights or something like that. Loads of southpaws in the gym. So I just, based upon what I'm seeing, I just don't see Fury dominating things at long range. I think he's going to have to close the guy down. I think he will be surprised by how awkward it is to hit Alexander Usyk. He talked about how difficult it was to pin down Steve Cunningham. I think he's going to get that same feeling in this fight. So, again, if Fury's as smart as I think he is, he'll dispense with all the messing around at long range and that kind of thing and just stick it on Usyk right away. Do what he did against Cunningham, because he only started sticking it on Cunningham, what was it, from the third round on? I think he's going to need to start that from the first round against Usyk. Don't allow this guy to get into his boxing and start moving around and, surprising you with how difficult it is to hit him, even though he's right in front of you. Because with Usyk, he's moving his feet, there's lateral movement, and also constant head movement. And he throws an enormous number of punches for a heavyweight. A lot of people overlook that, how many punches the guy throws. It's not normal for a heavyweight to throw that many shots. And he's throwing a lot of shots even down the stretch in a fight. So, don't allow him to get into all that. Jump on him and wear him out. If Usyk has still got gas in the tank in the second half of the fight because Fury has allowed him to, box, or Fury's turned it into a boxing match, I think Fury's in trouble. I think strategically, Fury just needs to stick it on the guy. And of course, Usyk needs to do what he's always done, which is move around and be the faster guy, be the guy with the better footwork. And speaking of footwork, Tyson Fury, I think this was in the post-fight interview, said that he thinks it's an even match. Well, he said, I'm just going to quote him here. He said, Usyk's older than me, actually. So he's about 35, I'm 34. So it's an even match. If he was 22, it might be different, but he's an old man. He's had 300 amateur fights. He's worn out too. He's got about 250,000 miles on the clock. He's had 315 amateur fights or something, and he's had about 20 professional fights. I don't believe he's got the best footwork in boxing. I don't believe he outspeeds me either. Now, does Fury really believe that Usyk is that worn out, or is this wishful thinking? But he's certainly thinking about it, right? He certainly seems to have this idea in his head, or at least wants to have this idea, that Usyk is worn out because of all his amateur fights. And of course, he has had a lot of amateur fights. He does have a lot of miles on the clock, no doubt about it. Usyk's athletic prime, just like Fury's, is probably a few years ago. But in terms of him saying he doesn't think Usyk outspeeds him, I think Usyk does outspeed him in both hand speed and foot speed. Usyk's hand speed is not like crazy fast. He's not going to shock you with how fast his hands are, but obviously his timing is good. And his balance is very, very good. And the way he constantly bounces, laterally and in and out of range, this constant foot movement combined with the head movement, it just throws off your coordination, especially if you're a bigger guy. You struggle to coordinate your hands to hit this guy that's moving in terms of his head and feet at the same time constantly, even though he's right in front of you. It's very confusing trying to concentrate on what Usyk is doing. And I think Fury will find that out quite quickly in the fight. As I say, I think the solution to that is don't play Usyk's game. Just jump on him. Don't do all that moving around and trying to box with him. I think that's a real mistake. So, interesting that he says he thinks Usyk is worn out. In terms of the age, Usyk is going to be 36 in January. So he's about 19 or 20 months older than Fury. So best part of 2 years. It's closer to 2 years than 1 year. He's a couple years older. Could that make the difference in the fight? Maybe. I mean, even though he schooled AJ twice, it was still a taxing, both fights were kind of taxing because of the fact that he's in there with a big guy who's hitting him on the arms and hitting him on the chest and hitting him in the body. And in the rematch, what was it? The 8th or 9th round where AJ really went for it and he went charging into Usyk and, elbows are there and everything like that. You feel that the next day. When you've been in there with a heavyweight that big and they've charged at you and they're trying to hit you anywhere they can, your body's definitely going to feel sore after that. Even though you've won it comfortably on the cards, physically it's not comfortable. And that definitely puts miles on the clock. So that's the fights, but also the training camps put miles on the clock. But one thing Usyk has in his favor with regards to the aging process is that he's always kept himself in shape. He hasn't had these periods in his career where he balloons up a huge amount of weight because that damages you over the long term. Usyk has always been a supreme athlete, totally disciplined, whereas Tyson Fury has struggled with his discipline in the past. So I think that's the reason that we've seen Usyk have the success at heavyweight that he's had so far at this age, because he has kept himself well preserved, So in terms of the age difference, Usyk is not a spring chicken, and he's definitely not going to get any faster. He's definitely going to be slowing down at this stage. And every fight he's in against a big heavyweight who's roughing him up is going to take something out of him. But if I were Fury, I wouldn't be relying on that. I wouldn't be relying on this idea that he's going to be faster than you. I wouldn't rely on that. I think therein lies, I don't want to say damnation, but I think that'll backfire if you're going to think you're going to go in there and outspeed Usyk, if that's what he's genuinely thinking. So, that's my take on Fury against Derek Chisora. A predictable result, a pointless fight, but I did see deterioration in foot speed, yes, but continued improvement in the punch technique. And hopefully we get to see this Usyk fight by March 4th. Obviously, Fury said that he's injured and that it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks to recover. As I said in the previous video, I seriously hope that he massively overestimated the recovery time. Because if 6 to 8 weeks is accurate, then obviously he's not going to be ready for March 4th. So I pray that that is not accurate from Tyson Fury. And as I said before, if he was injured and he knew he needed surgery going into the Chisora fight, and it really does take 6 to 8 weeks to recover, that would be absolutely unforgivable. Unforgivable. You don't jeopardize an undisputed fight by having a trilogy with Derek Chisora. You forget about Chisora, you have the surgery you need, and you be ready by March 4th at the latest. That's what you do. So as I say, I pray that Fury has massively overstated the recovery time for that injury. Because again, I want to see both guys put their best foot forward. I don't want to see Usyk in a couple fights time after he's had to fight Joyce and Hrgovic when he's a bit more worn out. Then Fury says, now's the time. I don't want to see anything like that. I want to see them fight next. Nothing in between. Next. I pray it happens. And when I say next, I mean by March 4th. I pray it happens. Anyway, moving on. Fury and Usyk. All right. Gervonta Davis says that he has split with Mayweather. Now, he said this a while ago. And I'm not sure what happened there. But, you know, he was supposed to have left Mayweather Promotions. It must have been at least a year ago. But then there was some ambiguity about it. And Mayweather saying he's still with us and blah, blah, blah. But Tank Davis has come out and said it again here. And, said that with regards to the Ryan Garcia fight, he's basically a free agent. And he's apparently been speaking to, or has spoken to Eddie Hearn. And Eddie Hearn offered him something like $10 million plus pay-per-view upside. And Gervonta Davis, well, the article's right here. Gervonta Davis leaks $10 million contract offer from Eddie Hearn for Ryan Garcia fight after asking why he isn't banned from promoting over Conor Benn situation in now deleted tweets. Oh dear. Eddie Hearn's having a mare lately. I mean, he's having a terrible time of it from PR perspective, right? But he said, yeah. And why didn't they ban Eddie Hearn for still trying to have fights after he knew a fight or fighter was cheating? Anyway, that's Gervonta Davis and what he's saying. I just want to get this fight on, between Davis and Ryan Garcia. I know Davis has got a fight before, so has Garcia. That's not the most promising thing in the world. If a fight's going to happen, you'd rather it just happen rather than people announcing it and then saying, oh yeah, both guys are going to fight one fight before it. Because anything can take place in those fights. Fighters can change their minds, get a different deal, go in a different direction. So it doesn't exactly inspire confidence when they've both got a fight beforehand. And obviously, Gervonta Davis being out of contract helps make the Ryan Garcia fight, but it all depends on who he decides to sign with as well. If he was to go and sign with Bob Arum, not that he will, I mean, potentially it could make the fight more difficult, Who knows? You would imagine it is more likely to happen now than it would be under PBC, or probably with any other promoter than it would be with PBC, because PBC just seemed very, very awkward. But yeah, until the fight's done, then as in both guys signed and it's happening next, then you can't really put too much stock in it. Let's hope it does take place. Moving on, I saw the press conference, the kickoff press conference for Artur Beterbiev against Anthony Yarde. I thought Beterbiev came across as quite funny, despite the broken English. He was, he had a wry smile, and he was dropping some jokes, which I always appreciate. Anthony Yarde was, I guess, the usual Anthony Yarde. Tunde was the usual Tunde. No real change there. They were talking about destiny and dream it, believe it, become it, lines in the camp, the same old spiel. Is this a more winnable fight for Anthony Yarde than Kovalev? I mean, Kovalev was clearly a fading force at a time when Anthony Yarde fought him. He'd been stopped by Andre Ward. He'd been stopped by Alida Alvarez. Obviously came back and beat Alvarez in the rematch. And he just looked like a damaged fighter at that stage, but he was still useful. And he controlled Anthony Yarde with a jab and eventually stopped him with a jab, right? In the, I think it was 11th round. Personally, I think, as I said in a previous video, Kovalev's got a better jab than Artur Beterbiev. Not that Beterbiev doesn't have a good jab, he does, and it's a powerful jab. But I just see Yarde being able to close the distance and get into punching range and get punches off more easily here than he was able to against Kovalev. Kovalev to me just looks a bit more, he might be a similar height to Beterbiev, but it just looks a bit more wiry and rangy to me. So, and of course, even though Beterbiev hasn't looked vulnerable, you know, I mean, obviously against Callum Johnson, he did get dropped. But of late, he hasn't looked vulnerable, has he? He's looked very strong in his performances. But he is 38, you know, so he's definitely no spring chicken. He's obviously kept himself in good nick, still in tremendous shape, but he's getting up there in age. So, I don't know, maybe the athleticism of Yarde, if he can get in there with some power shots. But as I mentioned in the post-fight video for Yarde's tune-up, the fact that he was getting hit clean by that guy, I can't even remember the guy's name, but he got caught clean by that guy early in the fight. That's not a good sign going up against Artur Beterbiev. So it might even be a firefight in this one. It may be a fight. We know that Beterbiev won't shy away from a firefight. And maybe that's Anthony Yarde's best chance of turning it into a firefight rather than being cautious and stuff like that. Trying to surprise Beterbiev in a firefight and catching him with something the way Callum Johnson caught him, and rather than be surprised at his success the way Callum Johnson was, jumping on Beterbiev if he manages to hurt him or stop or drop him, excuse me. So yeah, I give Yarde a chance. I certainly don't make him the favorite in the fight at all. You have to go with the guy with the track record and the pedigree. But I don't know, something tells me that Yarde will find it easier to land his shots, or at least get close, than he did against Kovalev. And when you've got a guy who's as athletic as Yarde, and he does have fast hands, and he can punch. I'm not saying he's a Beterbiev level puncher or Stevenson or one of these, or even Kovalev. I'm not saying he punches like those guys. But I think he punches hard enough, do you know what I mean, to hurt or get the respect of most light heavyweights, including Beterbiev. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to the fight. Again, Beterbiev favorite for sure. But, I don't know, I think Yarde has the potential to surprise people here. That's what I'll say. So, yeah, the press conference, Beterbiev dropping some jokes was quite funny. And Anthony Yarde, just the usual Anthony Yarde with Tunde. Moving on from that, Lawrence Okolie has been ordered to face his mandatory challenger, David Light. Now, just like you guys, and most of you guys, I'm assuming, I've never heard of this individual before in my life, David Light. And he's got one of the worst nicknames I've seen for many a year. He's called the Great White. David the Great White Light. That's a terrible nickname. And this is him. He looks a bit like Beavis, right? From Beavis and Butthead with that forehead and the hairstyle there. So this is who Lawrence Okolie is going to fight next. He's 20-0 with 12 KOs. He's from New Zealand. He's 31 years of age. You look at his record here. This is a bit of a, how can I describe it? Ominous? What is it? It's not encouraging, is it? When the guy's never fought outside of New Zealand before. Oh, actually, tell a lie. Other than his last fight, he was down in the 10th round against Brandon Glanton. Yeah, never heard of this guy. Bulletproof Glanton. Never heard of him. But yeah, Light, all but one of his fights have been in New Zealand, which is not the best sign because New Zealand doesn't have a particularly deep talent pool with regards to boxing. It's a very small country in terms of population size. So I need to have a look at him, obviously. I don't want to write him off without actually watching him first. But based upon the record, if you're just looking at it at first glance, you wouldn't think this is the kind of guy that's going to give Lawrence Okolie too many problems. But before I go into the analysis and the future video, the real story here is the fact that this is, I believe, gone to purse bids, or it may go to purse bids if they can't come to a deal. And that might, I don't know, it might give Lawrence Okolie the opportunity to have his last fight under Matchroom, because the way I understand it, actually, I'm not sure if every contract is going to work this way, but in many cases, if a fighter who is signed to a particular promoter ends up fighting on a different promoter's show because his promoter loses the purse bid, he still has to pay his own promoter a percentage of his purse. That's the way I've understood it to work in many instances. And if that is the case with Okolie against David Light, then that would mean that he would have fulfilled his apparent contractual obligation to Eddie Hearn without having to fight on an Eddie Hearn show. And that, I'm sure, from a psychological perspective, even if he has to still pay Hearn his percentage, that would be preferable for Lawrence Okolie, I think. Fighting on someone else's show when Eddie Hearn's not around and all that kind of thing. But regardless of all that, Eddie Hearn did say that him and Lawrence Okolie got on the phone recently and had a long chat about the situation between them. And, I guess he expects Lawrence Okolie to move on. He says they disagree about whether Lawrence Okolie has got one more fight. And Eddie Hearn basically said that he expressed how disappointed and upset he was that Lawrence Okolie inferred certain things about him. Being comparing him to the guy from Django Unchained, with a picture of Leo DiCaprio's character in that film and all that kind of thing. So yeah, he said that he expressed his disappointment to Lawrence Okolie during this long chat. Well, I just like to see the situation resolved because Lawrence Okolie is a world champion. He's in the prime of his career right now, and I hate seeing fighters get bogged down with legal issues with promoters. It's a real shame when that happens. Mikey Garcia went through it. Andre Ward went through it with Goosen, Dan Goosen. Really, a lot of Andre Ward's best years were sat on the bench. It was him sat on the bench because of legal issues with a promoter. With Mikey Garcia, I think he was out the ring for 2 years because of his issue with Bob Arum. It's a real shame when that happens. I wouldn't want to see that happen with Lawrence Okolie. I hope he just goes ahead and fights this David Light guy, whether it's on an Eddie Hearn show or on someone else's show. Hopefully he can just get that contract done and move on with his career onto bigger and better things, whether that's a unification with, is it Opataya at cruiserweight, or moving up to heavyweight, because I think that's inevitable for Lawrence Okolie. He's such a big, strong guy at cruiser. Surely he's going to move up to heavyweight sooner or later. So anyway, that's the Lawrence Okolie situation as it stands right now. Moving on, we've got the final presser here for Terence Crawford against David Avanesian. Zab Judah, is he part of the promotional team that put this fight together? I don't know. But yeah, we've got Zab Judah here. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Terence Crawford apparently being paid an enormous amount of money for this fight. An amount of money which doesn't even make sense based upon the reports of the figures going round. It's like, why is Terence Crawford... I mean, look, I'm not begrudging him getting paid as much as this, if it's true. But it just baffles me that a company would actually step forward and pay that amount of money for a fight that isn't going to make any money. Like, why would you step forward and just absolutely, have a disaster financially? Why would you do that? I mean, maybe they want to step into boxing and make a splash, and they feel like perhaps they can retain Crawford after this or attract other fighters to them by coming in and, putting out this crazy amount of money for a fight that doesn't really warrant this type of purse. I don't know. But I know I've heard Dwyer say that he's skeptical about whether Terence Crawford will actually get all that money. I think that's healthy skepticism because we've seen Triller, for example, various fighters that were on, appeared on that platform said that they didn't get paid or they didn't get paid in full. When you're coming out splashing all types of money, claiming you're going to pay people this and that, it's not that surprising that people later come out and say that they didn't get what they were owed. So hopefully Terence Crawford does. Now, as far as the Avanesian fight itself, Crawford is a consummate pro. He has responded to the fact that a lot of people say this is a joke of a fight, an easy fight, straightforward. He's saying the opposite. He's saying this guy's dangerous and he's tough and he needs to be taken seriously. And he absolutely does. Avanesian shouldn't be beating the likes of Terence Crawford, but Terence Crawford is, 35 or 36? He's no spring chicken, particularly for this weight. These are not heavyweights. Heavyweights tend to have a bit of a longer shelf life. But with welterweights, by the time you're 35, 36, you're really looking at retirement or very close to looking at retirement by that age. And many fighters are already retired by 35, 36 at welterweight. So if you underestimate a guy at this stage of your career, you can come unstuck against a guy like David Avanesian. So Crawford needs to be on it. Can't be messing around here. Avanesian's a very, very tough guy. He's willing to take however many shots he needs to get in and land his own. His style is all about pressure, about weathering the storm and then getting to you. And so for an older fighter, that can be a bit of a nightmare. See, with older fighters, they typically like to slow the pace down. They typically like to use, old man tactics and clinching and all kind of, veteran tricks to get through a fight. Bernard Hopkins was a master at this in the latter stages of his career, using all these tactics to slow everything down and get you dancing to his tune in the ring. The way that in most instances you want to approach a fight against a veteran is to stick it on him. Fight a young man's fight. Fight in a way that forces the older guy to try and match you by way of a punch output, volume, or energy and movement. You don't want to fight his fight, which is a slow-paced chess match. You don't want to do that with an old fighter. Get in there and make him feel old. Use your youth. Not that David Avanesian's that young. In fact, I'm not sure how old he is. How old is David Avanesian? I'm sure he must be in his 30s at this point. Doesn't say Terence Crawford's age on here, but let's say Avanesian's age. Yeah, he's 34. So he's only, a year or two younger than Terence Crawford. But either way, his style is pressure. His style is, putting it on you. And he's been doing that his whole career. Needs to do that against Terence Crawford. And if Crawford, for whatever reason, you can say that you're not underestimating someone. But when you're an elite fighter, it's hard to motivate yourself a lot of the time against people, particularly at this stage, right, where he's looking for the Errol Spencers of the world. It can be hard to motivate yourself. So as much as you say you don't want to underestimate the guy, if you don't have any kind of fear factor, sometimes it's hard to raise your level of intensity and training to where it needs to be at your absolute best. So anyway, I say all that to say Terence Crawford should win this fight as long as he's on the job. As long as he isn't, lacking intensity and training and so on because he's thinking about the Errol Spencers of the world. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Obviously, I've covered quite a few bits of boxing news and stories here. So, yeah, have at it in the comments, and I'll catch you guys on the next video. All right, I'm out. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, But that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and is 100% censorship free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.